call the meeting to order. First up is public comment. This is anything that's not on the agenda. Betsy?
I just want to share. I'm Betsy Race. I'm part of the East Valley Community Group. We're one of the advisory groups. And we saw that we've been talking about things we can do in the East Valley. We're always talking about that. One of the things that came up was perhaps putting some sort of designs on the telephone poles.
So we're gonna get to that.
Yes,
It's
you
on
are.
the agenda.
I just wanted to share something that we've been talking about there, and we'll be making a request once we know what the process is and everything, probably, and have done some more discussing ourselves, but we're looking at putting artwork up of some sorts.
Okay. Approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? We don't have a minimum, right? Consent calendar, meeting minutes and warrants.
Motion to approve?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Under business, discussion about the changes and updates to the sign ordinance. So, my understanding, Trevor, from research is that an ordinance for a town, if it's silent, it's not approved. Is that
I think that's
right?
a question we want some guidance on. You know, sometimes when we try to test our own boundaries of municipal authority, and where it's silent, say in statute, it's presumed that we don't have that ability. So assuming that applies, but that's a layperson's best guess. But if that's a question you want to answer, we should. I didn't have a chance to talk to Mike Tarrant today, but that would be a good one for him if that's where you want.
So if we look at the drafting in that, in the sign ordinance currently, we're under those banners and signs. It's pretty specific on the two types. There's decoration and then there's advertising for events, whether the town is doing them or the town is sponsoring them and whatnot. Is it fair to say, and I think this is somewhere where we want clarity, like, we're listing out things that we'll allow and under what conditions we'll allow it, but we don't list things that are disallowed, right? So it seem like that's the case, right? Because we're not listing what we don't allow. We wouldn't want it just to be free for all for everything else. So, is it, usually we have the planning commission help with drafting these. Is this something that we should toss to them, have them meet with legal counsel, meet with the Legion on what they're trying to do, meet with the East Valley group on what they're trying to do, the different pieces, and see how they can redraft so we're clear and we don't get on that slippery slope?
I think that's a good idea, especially if the goal is to take a look at the ordinance as a whole. So the banners are the one piece because that's what prompted the conversation, but if they're gonna look at some of the other sign types that are in there that then tie into land use regulation, they'd be the appropriate body for that, because it does tie in so closely with the zoning regulations. You know, when a business opens, the sign permit application is usually part of the package, depending on where they are and where they end up. Generally we do list out the things that are allowed. Sometimes in ordinances you list out the things that are prohibited. It kind of depends on what the ordinance is after. So, like a public nuisance ordinance, that might be one where we list the things that we don't want to allow. Signs, zonings, we tend to structure them so that they list what's allowed and where is it allowed. Doesn't mean that they won't also have sections that say these things aren't allowed in this district zone set of conditions, but.
We used to love 2.4.3 in the zoning regulations because it said all other items that the board thought was okay for the town. Like, we're approving this under 2.4.3, but then they rewrote the regulations. But so Larry, the planning commission could take this up
Absolutely.
and review it. So we have obviously a next summer request kind of thing for a totally different type of, like, more decorative thing over in the East Valley, but then we have the Legion ones that they'd like to do in that May timeframe. But, so any changes would have to come back to us, right? And then we have to have a hearing on it, right? And then we adopt it, and then it's so many days.
60 for an ordinance,
for it to be-
45 days for appeal. So it's a longer process for a non-land use ordinance. There's a slightly different mechanism for those, like we've talked about before.
Mhm.
So we're talking about like what, about a 3-month, 3.5 month
Yeah,
adoption period?
I think if you planned on, it depends on meeting cycles, how quickly each body gets through it, but yeah, if you planned on, say, 4, to full effectiveness in a best case scenario, just because you have that 60-day window at the back end.
And we could do it in multiple pieces, right? We could look at sections of it and improving that, and then the rest of the land use pieces and some of the bigger picture. If I'm just thinking if the planning commission can't get through the entire ordinance and everything they'd like to do, we could get sections of it, right? And the select board could adopt that and then go back and do the rest of it. I don't know what your workload looks like in that committee and what all that would be, but we could address the language in the banner section and what that looks like,
Yeah.
separate from an entire rewrite of
Yeah, I think we'd have to do that because there's other issues in front of the planning commission which have been sort of percolating for a long time that shouldn't be putting off much longer.
Okay.
I would sort of put in a plug for the 2 more immediate or things that come up sort of both now and the most often that should be smaller sectional fixes, so to be clarifying whatever you end up doing with the banner piece that comes back here. Also addressing temporary signs in certain areas, see if there's a way to beef up that language. Because we're about to change the shape of that middle island by the village fire station just to be done with all of the sign complaints. I'm joking, we're not really gonna
Pave it. Just pave it and shape it.
put a wall and sharp spikes around it so nothing can be put in there, but we've thought about it.
Yep. And so, okay. And can we get in anticipation of the planning commission taking this up, can we get an opinion from legal on whether this is a scenario by which if it's silent, it's not allowed, versus if it's silent, it's, I don't know, the select board has to approve all the details or whatever.
Yep.
I'm struggling with that one, because I have a hard time believing we would leave everything else kind of open. Okay. All right. I mean, I don't know what anybody else thinks, I
think it's smart because it's just unclear.
well, yeah. And are we headed down a slippery slope? I mean, we all support the veterans, we all appreciate all this. It's like, how do we do it so we don't set ourselves up for the next group that comes through the door and yet still try to meet their timeline of what they're trying to do?
I did reach out to Williamstown. Very short, not very like elaborative answers. They put the signs up themselves, so they didn't have a separate entity coming, but they put the signs up themselves. They haven't had any other requests like this. They did have to contact the electric company just because it's on electric poles, whereas, you know, these are light posts. But they're like, we don't have insurance. We put them up. No one else has complained. No one's complained.
Yeah. Do they have,
Very short and sweet answers.
yeah. They have a sign ordinance?
I'm looking really quickly to see if I can find that, and I'll check real quick in their zoning. It could be it's maybe baked in somewhere else. I don't see it in a standalone list, looking real quick.
I don't know that anybody thinks this is a bad idea, it's a how do we get it so we don't set a precedent or set something for the next group that may not be as acceptable. That's probably the wrong word, and I'll probably have that thrown back at me, but, like, how do we make it a fair process? And define what we want and what we don't want as a town. I have a hard time leaving that just to the select board, I guess. I'd like to see it discussed, like, where do we want them, how do we want them, how many, kind of timelines. And the request is for 6 months, 6.5 months. Is that a time span that's acceptable, or do they?
I can reach back out to them and see if they have
I think
any.
if they have something, it would be good
Yeah.
for the planning commission,
Yep.
especially if they can just copy it. I think it gets a little more challenging because, there's probably not much competition to take over the power poles.
Who wants to talk to the power company?
Yeah.
And they did say that they take them down just after Veterans Day before winter, which makes sense. And they said they have volunteers do it. So,
They may not have
It's the same
zoning ordinances
scenario.
either.
Yeah.
I can't find zoning ordinances, so they may not have done. There's a reference to a news article where
Do
it
they
was,
have zoning?
yeah, it was turned down at some point. That's what I can't tell between
Yeah.
that. There's nothing coming up on the site, but I've
yeah,
been looking for 37 seconds, so.
I can reach back out. That's easy.
Any thoughts on whether we should ask the planning commission to take this up?
Do we need a motion for that?
Um,
I'm in support of the idea. I don't know if we need a motion, but
we can do a motion.
okay. I motion to ask the planning commission to take a look at our sign ordinance and modify it as necessary.
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Well, this is on.
She was on the wrong link. She had messaged me. Yeah.
Parallel corresponding timeline. I'll get you Mike's answer on the current ordinance and
And I think that would
how
help
things fit
the
together there.
planning commission, and then maybe you can, when the planning commission's ready to do it, reach out to Peter, who's the not intended spokesperson on this, and Betsy about what they're wanting to do and kind of what that means, just to have it as an idea.
May I react
Peter?
to a couple of things?
Sure.
First, I think the adage you were looking for statutory construction, and I can't say the Latin, but it's the expression of one is the exclusion of the others. That's the old English common law rule of statutory construction. It is no longer followed because they found it was too restrictive, particularly in areas, ordinances, environmental laws over the last 40 years have been torn apart when they try and say, well, if you say air pollution, but you didn't say water pollution. So the adage of the expression of one is the exclusion of the others is no longer the rule for statutory construction. The rule for statutory construction is you look at the whole document and try and make common sense out of it. So, for example, in this case, for our concern, you'd look at that section on banners and say, well, whatever. Now, the second point I would like to make is that the rule, the absolute standard ironclad rule in Vermont law, at least up to 2017 when I retired, is that local towns and committees must review a permit application pursuant to the ordinance in effect at the time it was filed. Can you, if you think about it for a few minutes, can you imagine the havoc that will wreak when any select board or zoning board decides, oh, I don't really like this, so I'm gonna put this application on the side and do an amendment. And quite frankly, that sounds to me like what this board is doing now. That you're saying, well, we don't want to take up this because we have concerns about the words in the statute, whether it fits exactly. Now, I'll speak to my last thing. The more I look at the existing sign ordinance, the more I'm kind of...
It's okay. I'm trying to lean over to you. Sorry.
The more I am puzzled by the reticence of the board just to say yes to go. every time I read it, I think it's more and more clear that what we've asked is the 5-minute okay. So I look at section, gotta go back. First, banners are not very, in the definitional section, banners are not very artfully defined. And they're defined more in, let me read it again, more with respect to material and not to content, except it's for which advertise sales products and which constitutes a form of advertising, not banners which say such things as open or sale. Well, if you say that's the only thing we could have with banners, then half the banners we see around town don't fit the banner size. So I think you'd have to look at it with common sense. The banners you see every summer announcing events and announcing other activities like rifle sales at the, rifle raffles at the fire station and things like that. They're just banners, and they can be decorative. So anyway, when we get to the operative sections of signs, we go to section 506, requirements by sign type. And there are several subparagraphs, A, B, C, D, E. F is the subparagraph for banners. And the first thing you look at that, F, banners, paren, no permit required, in paren. No permits required for banners under the existing ordinance. 1, a property is allowed one two-sided banner that is pole mounted, doesn't apply here. 2, banners are only permitted in the central business gateway and interchange districts. Okay, we're in that. 3, banners on the downtown light post. First paragraph, banners advertising an event. And we see those all the time. And the restriction on that, town-sponsored events or events taking place on town property. And then, such banners shall be allowed for no more than 31 days and shall be removed after 7 days after the event. So what event banners are pretty clear. Next, all banners, whether event or for decoration, and that seems to be your restriction. Well, what is a hometown heroes? It's decorative. I say it's words of honor, but it's decorative. All banners, whether to advertise an event or for decoration, shall receive permission by the select board prior to installation. So even though there's no permit required, since we're putting it on a town light post, it requires permission. That's mandated. Can't do it unless we get permission. And then it says, such permission shall be granted. That's mandatory, that's not permissive. It must be granted by the select board if the design, and there are 2 criteria, if the banner is not offensive to common sensibilities, that's just a general, not offensive to common sensibilities, it's not a personal sensibility, a personal thing, it's not offensive, and it meets all applicable requirements of the ordinance. And the applicable requirements of the ordinance with regard to our banner request is, I think, basically the size, which we've already discussed, we're within the size, and I suppose under section 207, regulation by usage, it talks about, F again, 207F, informational signs permit required, but it said signs on the lamppost shall be considered temporary with a time limit of 2 years from the effective date. This is to allow for the rotation of the signs. So if we take up 30 spots like we requested, and there aren't enough spots for other people, then they get on a waiting list, and we get out of line and they get in line, and it goes like that. So I look at this and I keep saying, why is there such reticence to just say, let's go? So that's, I know that I've gone a little further than talking about discussing updates to the sign ordinance, but you don't need to, and you cannot put our request off while you go through your 6-month amending the sign ordinance to better accommodate or more clearly accommodate or to disallow what we've requested.
Peter, can I just where did
Sure.
you said section 207F has the 2 years?
Yes, but it says.
207 by
Yeah.
regulation,
But
it's under civic and other groups, yeah, permits required,
Yeah.
civics and other groups. It's like saying, we're a civic group,
Oh,
or a
but then you've
service
got a permit
organization.
required.
Pardon?
Now you're
That
back
says
to
permit required.
Right.
But
You're
but I'm going
permit
and
not
saying, no
required.
permits are required for the banners.
Yeah.
But the select board must approve if our design fits common sensibilities and it meets all of the requirements of the ordinance. And that's the only place in the ordinance that I find other requirements that might fit lamppost banners.
But I don't know that it's not an informational sign,
Right.
right?
No, ours isn't, ours is
So the 2
decorative.
years doesn't come in,
Well, no,
so that part doesn't,
okay, so it doesn't
Match
come
up
in,
at
we
all.
don't have to rotate them every 2 years. We can leave them up forever, I guess.
No.
I'm just trying to figure out when it says it meets common sensibilities
So
and
who-
all other requirements of the ordinance, that's the only other requirement I could find.
where's the definition of decorative?
I couldn't find one.
Me either.
No.
So we
Banner
could,
signs, I mean banners, but not banner signs, not events, not decorative. It's all undefined. And so we have to, if it's not defined, we have to use our common sense. We don't go back and amend the ordinance. We've used the common sense.
and so if we allow only 31 days for events and whatnot,
Yeah.
who sets the amount of time those banners are up?
Well, I think that could be part of the permission you give, but I would submit that it isn't limited to the 31-day event because it doesn't, a sign of honor isn't announcing something's going to happen and then over. And so that's why we suggested place them before Memorial Day, take them after Veterans Day. So they'd be up for Memorial Day. They'd be up for the 4th of July celebration downtown when we have the most people to see them. They'd be up for Labor Day, they would be up for Veterans Day, and then come down. And that's the same schedule that we use for the street flags that the Rotary and the Legion put up for the town and have since 9/11. Every year, the town crew finally told us old men not to climb up on the post, so we give them the flags and they put them out. But every year, the Rotary and the Legion get together, update the street flags and we don't have we have an agreement with the town back from 9/11 that we do it, and we put them up, we make sure they get up before Memorial Day. And if we haven't talked to Rob Reynolds, he comes over to the place and bangs on the door and says, tomorrow's the day I'm putting them up, get them out to me. And then they take them down after Veterans Day. And we propose the same schedule for the Hometown Heroes banners.
All right, so the Legion application is not on the agenda tonight.
And I don't think you've said you're not gonna do anything with it. I've got
Right.
questions to bring back to Mike Tarrant that you've asked as part of the review, that will shape the review under the current ordinance. Is how that part, that's still
Yep.
independent of anything that happens with the sign ordinance, which I think this highlights needs some work for clarity's sake.
Can you tell us what those questions are?
Where does an application fall when it's not an explicitly permitted or prohibited use? And then wrote the other one down. Had a follow-up to when you were
Is that question specific to the ordinance or is it general?
specific to to this ordinance, to
Okay.
the sign ordinance itself, and does an application meeting the criteria above, meaning it's not clear, need to be reviewed under the existing ordinance? And then it might build out from there. Usually our conversations do a little bit based on the ordinance that's in place.
Now, Sonny Holt is here, who was chair of the planning commission when this ordinance was drafted.
If I can shed some light on this?
But I don't want this to continue down the path, that anybody objects to this. What we need to do is make sure that we have a clear path of coming to a decision here that will stand up when the next group comes through the door. We don't wanna start down a slippery slope. That's what we're trying to make sure, that we're on solid ground when we make a decision here.
Yeah, if I may, and I'll stay seated. I'm approaching my 90th birthday, so sometimes I'm not steady on my feet. Randolph is sort of honored because we have a Vermont National Cemetery. It's part of our, what we are, and that'll be forever. I had 32 years in the military. My wife was in the military. My sister was in the military. My kid brother was in the military. He flew combat missions over Vietnam. My son, Taylor, he's a staff sergeant down in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and he's a recruiter down there. And we go down there quite often to see our grandchildren. But one thing I noticed about Pennsylvania, a lot of the towns in Pennsylvania, especially Cranton, Scranton, and outlying of Scranton, they have these hometown hero banners, okay? I see them in the wintertime and I see them in the summertime. They must be semi-permanent, okay? Anytime they're frayed, they replace them. So at least down there, there's no prohibition against those banners. I'm a member of the Legion, okay, and there's veterans in the Legion, but you might be surprised in this entire town, and maybe it's because of the veteran cemetery, there's other civilians, okay, that have had military background. I just named some examples. So I really don't think this would be offensive to the majority of the people in Randolph. I respectfully ask that you consider this request in that light.
So
Thank you.
we are, just to be very clear, we are considering this. The big question we have is, the ordinance is not clear about where these fall and what the criteria is and what we do. And so what we really need to be sure is that we are on solid ground, so the next group through the door isn't treated differently. And that if you read the ordinance, it's a little dicey. So the legal counsel is to make sure that we're doing it right, but we also want to toss it to the planning commission to be like, hey, this has got to be clarified.
Yeah. Understand.
That's what we're trying to do. Okay.
And you guys meet every Thursday from now to the end of the month, so our general plan had been regular meeting tonight, do some business, then do some budget stuff. Next Thursday's budget, only because you got some big ones. Then on the 23rd, we'd schedule any other regular business, which is sort of how we've structured it loosely in the past. And then we can use any of those at any point to include regular business. And then the 31st is when you have to warn town meeting. So you have 3 other bites of the apple just this month already scheduled, and then there's one in February just after that. If for some reason there's extra time needed, so you have some easy opportunities in which you're already hopefully planning to be here.
Okay.
And just Trini, before we move on, I just wanted to tell the folks in here that I wholeheartedly support our veterans. 2 of the most important people in my life, my dad was a veteran who served overseas in Germany, and my father-in-law, a vet who served in Vietnam. So I just want to make it super clear that I support you people, and I get it, and it has nothing to do with this conversation.
All right, moving on. Next up is town report dedication.
This is where you
We
submit.
identify a person and who's gonna do it.
Pardon me. Before you move on,
Yeah.
did I understand this will come back up on the agenda on January 23rd, or is it?
Yeah, whatever, 2 weeks from today.
Provided we have Mike's, yeah.
If we have Mike's opinion. Yep. The intent is to get you an answer,
Mhm.
so they can go out and move forward.
We were
But-
supposed to be moving forward before January 1st.
Well, sorry, we're government.
Now,
We're here to help.
As I said, you feel like it's delay, and you know what the NICD is. So, I would urge you.
Is it diligence? Due
No, it's not
diligence would be
diligence.
2? Difference of opinion?
Okay.
Could I just say something real quickly? I'm on the American Legion committee for this process, and the only thing that comes to my mind, I understand totally what you're saying. You can bend someone who's worked in the corporate or business world. The slippery slope can be a slippery slope. But there's also such a thing as analysis paralysis. And it seems to me that you are exhibiting a little bit of that. I understand the fear and concern, but when we first discussed the idea of these honor banners, I was so sure that this would be something that the select board and the town would be very happy to have, and I understand your support of the veterans. I don't think anybody in the room would probably say they don't support veterans. Everybody supports veterans usually. But this analysis and trying to correct a systemic issue within the ordinances or whatever is disheartening to see in process. That's all.
Good, thank you. We're moving on. Town report dedication. We moved to that already. We talked about Carol Bushy. That was the name that we were, the two that we were up on last year. Do you have any others?
Yeah, I should have pulled the list. You settled pretty quickly on last year's recipients, but we did have a couple of other names that, see if I still have them.
Yeah, Carol was
I don't
one of
remember them off
them.
the top of my head though.
Okay. Move that to next month, or next week, I mean.
That's not to be too late. We may have to either pick somebody. There have been years where we haven't
Yeah, but we
done it, but
should.
the years we don't do it is exactly when everybody, that's the one first question we get is where's the dedication, so.
That's
And then
nice
the other
to do.
thing to be thinking about is which one of you would, if you want, would like to take a star turn as the author of that, since
How do you feel about that, Hillary?
Writing the dedication.
Yeah, you're probably pretty good at writing. You were a teacher.
I know Carol, I wouldn't mind doing it.
You wouldn't mind
if
doing
it's
it?
her.
Yeah. I do really like
I don't
Carol.
know who else is, we're considering, but
I mean, Carol's, it's hard to beat Carol. She's just so much.
she's in everything.
Mm-hmm.
Everything.
Everything. She's even involved in things you don't even realize she's involved with.
Is that what we wanna do?
do it.
Do you have other
People
names?
upstairs on Zoom.
Do you have any other names or thoughts?
Do you wanna move with Carol?
I'm comfortable with that.
Do you know Carol?
Yeah.
I was wondering, I think my boss was texting me, would it be alright if, I think the Orca account is asking to be let into the city?
Are they on the updated link or the old one? Because I don't see them
Okay, thank you.
in the list. There's an agenda with an updated link at the top of the list. If they go to that one, I should be able to see them.
Sorry, thank you.
No, it's
Yeah, no
okay,
problem.
thank you.
Alright.
Are you comfortable with writing that then, Trinity?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it.
Do we need to motion to approve her as the
I
dedicated?
don't think so, but I'll reach out to her if you
Okay.
Awesome. Next up, we have a request to appoint a member, a Republican representative to the Board of Civil Authority. We had two names that came forward. Anybody have any questions on that or wanna nominate one of them?
I don't know of the names.
I do. There's Rachel Putney or Martha Hafner.
Oh, okay. I don't know if I didn't see that.
I would motion to approve Rachel Putney.
Yep.
As the Republican representative
Second.
of the Board of Civil Authority.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
That gets you the number you needed, or that we need. That's,
Just one,
do you just need one? Okay.
no, but we had to give you a list,
Perfect.
so that's two, plural. Thank you.
The ethics
Steve.
law compliance, adopt a liaison and compliant recipient.
Yep. And so the way that law is structured is that the person in my role, person in the chair spot, and a few others have to take the training when it comes up. It's good for 3 years if you stay in those roles. New members then have to take it within a certain, I think it's 120 days after they're elected. It also, I think, applies to development review board members, and there's one other public body, I think that is. A lot of what's in that law seems to be conflict of interest focused. I point out in here that we've had a conflict of interest and a code of ethics in place for at least 16 years now, on one, and this is year 17 for the other. This will replace those in terms of order of operations. And so this would, by having me serve as your primary, that's how it functions when we get public records requests, if there was an open meeting law issue, any of those things. So it keeps it sort of in that familiar hub, plus the person in this role has to do the training anyway. And then we provide an outlet if I'm the subject of the complaint, 'cause I'm a pretty awful person. Then it would go to whoever the board chair is. And then that way, my hands aren't also on handling the complaint. If it comes in and it's about me, or to whoever is in the spot, so that's sort of the first order of business. We gotta do that within a certain number of days from January 1. We'll post the code of ethics, we'll use the VLCT Secretary of State model complaint form for now. As I mentioned in there, we'll use the model ordinance if we have any complaints between now and whenever the ordinance is in place. Because as we just covered, even if you voted tonight, it's 60 days out before that's effective, so at least there's one process and we're kind of making that known. And then the trainings should come into play, I think next September, I heard, was that they haven't fully built them out. I don't think they know fully who's gonna give them. The State Ethics Commission has 5 members. It's 3 lawyers and a CPA and State Human Resources Commissioner, I think it's a department. So lots of municipal representation, we're gonna be well cared for. I don't really mean that, sorry.
So do we have to appoint a liaison?
Yeah,
Is
we
that
should
what we
appoint,
have to
yes,
do?
yeah,
And is that you?
would be the town manager with the select board chair as the secondary liaison. Should
How
I
about
be, or the manager be the subject?
How about the secretary of the select board as the second?
Could be anybody other than me. It doesn't say, it doesn't, yeah. It doesn't say you have to have a second. I just think,
She caught on.
I want a second because the way I think this is gonna be used, and maybe not here, but in other places, that every time somebody gets a decision they don't like from a manager, from someone in that role, the complaint's gonna be about that person.
Great.
I really believe that's how this will most commonly be used. And so it would be wise to set up now, even though it's not required, somebody to be that liaison, or to be the complaint recipient, should we be in that spot.
Yeah.
And are we like saying like a certain role, like specifically it's always the chair or it's always the vice chair?
I would tie it to the role just
To the
in
role,
case,
yeah, that's
yeah.
what I mean, yeah, instead of the person, okay.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cause it doesn't read as if you have to every year redesignate somebody, you know, it's sort of once you're
Right. I
designated.
was wondering about that too.
Yeah,
'Cause
and
it's like
and that'll be
official
clarified,
class.
it's also new, it might come out that we end up in an annual
Review.
appointment process, or it might be you designate the office and you're fine.
Good.
We'll just have to wait and see.
But we meet the need for now if we say the town manager with a backup as, or is it an either or?
I think it's the manager
If the
with,
complaint's about the town manager, then it has to go to the select board.
yeah, well, that's it, yeah, the motion, the recommended motion with the board chair as the liaison if the town manager is the complaint's subject.
Yeah, I've seen that in something else too. Where I saw that, but. Is that in the union contract?
Might be. That would make
That's where I
sense,
saw that.
for personnel policy maybe. 'Cause I think it goes to you as a body in the contracts.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
So you do need motions for those, there are 2 recommended ones.
Alright, so.
Very excited about all those. Okay, I mean, because we've got our own code of ethics, we've got our own code of conflict, and then I have a professional association that provides me with a separate, more stringent code of ethics. So I don't know what problem we're fixing that we haven't already addressed, but
Right.
it is now the law, so we'll do, with that grievance aside.
Okay, so, I'll motion to appoint the town manager as the liaison and complaint recipient, with the second in command as the chair of the select board. Did I do okay?
Well, yeah, the record will reflect your intent.
Perfect. I mean, this is following you around in life. Like, I say something, and I was like, says it more smartly. More smartly.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carries. Adopt a complaint procedure.
So we had that on there, the idea was that maybe we could do that as we looked into it with the ordinance, you wouldn't be able to do that. And then if you're okay with our temporary procedure, just to follow that in the model ordinance, it follows regular old sort of due process. We log the complaint within a certain period of time, we move it on through whatever ladder. There's supposed to be an investigation to the extent that there is. It'll be interesting if we get a complaint before we've had the training in using a model ordinance to try to investigate something we haven't been trained on the parameters of. I will wear a Hawaiian shirt, cut this down into the mustache, and investigate like Magnum PI, because that's what I think it needs, so just be forewarned.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Kind of worth a
You
complaint,
see,
actually.
I'm gonna wear more shorts.
You don't have the right kind of car.
Well, if you see some rental bills, just don't worry about it. But,
All right,
so we'll keep working on that.
let's go to the general fund budget review.
So just to kind of recap, the calendar we've been working off of had tonight as sort of your first detailed look. We had focused on most of the general fund departments, building and grounds. We had put aside with some of the other public works categories for next time. We can get into that. Harold's not here, not expected to be here. He is next time, but so most of these are general fund ones. And then next week we'll look at highway, police, which should be an easy one, right? Building and grounds, and a few others. And then on the 23rd, we'll start capital review then too. And then on the 23rd, what we'll do is continue capital review, water, wastewater budgets, and then that's sort of your open conversation about are there other things you want to see, explore, have us research, because you have about a week between that and when you got a warrant town meeting on the 31st. If we can come out of each process step, but ideally no later than next week, but if there's something radical you want to see, something different, something we have to run down, obviously with that set deadline, hard deadline at the end, sooner is better than later to identify that. So we might ask for just a little recap, how you feeling, what do you need to each spot along the way. So this version's a little different than what you saw in December on the summary sheet, and so we've updated the summary sheet. You see the general fund significantly lower as a percentage increase. What we did were sort of two things that came out of that conversation and other conversations. The first one is, and I want to be sort of very clear, we've listed it as a separate category as the ambulance request is pulled out of the general fund and would sit on the warning as a separate funding request. I looked back, and since I've been here, that request has gone up $115,000. And I got here in fiscal year 22. So this is not a long timeline. That's what, 1/3 it's increased by since then. So this just gives voters a chance to review, debate, do it separately. We'll quantify when we get into tax rate tables what that is, so it doesn't seem like we're trying to keep that out of the mix, out of the calculation. People will know if you pass it, it's 6 cents or whatever it works out to be on that, and we'll factor into what a total rate would be, because we'll assume that everything passes when we do that exercise like we always have. The other thing that's in there is the debt service payments for the fire station. The principal and interest are removed from this version, presuming that we used legal settlement funds from all of that to pay off that debt service early. We can pay off the principal, as you recall, put a little bit into escrow. It'll basically be a year by the time we sort of take care of all of that, and then the remainder of that obligation goes away. So that frees up $160,000 in general fund payments there. The rest of the increases sort of reflect what was in there before. There are no major additions or deletions from what you saw last time. We can go into the individual lines obviously here next. Same overall kind of drivers across categories, with health insurance being the primary one. We saw anywhere from 14 to 18% on those increases. We have had a real big shift in the last couple of years in our employee mix, in that we had a couple of years we got pretty lucky in that people were on single plans, buyouts, or maybe even a few two-person plans. As we've turned everybody over, we seem to have picked up quite a few folks that are on family plans. And so it just says you sort of have a budget, individual budget number. You'll see the aggregated line that's $300-something thousand. Our 85% of a premium for a family plan at the level that's provided, that's in those collective bargaining agreements, is projected to cost us about $42,000 per person in fiscal year '26. That's up from around 36, I believe it was, 36, 37, somewhere in there. And then the employee share of that is 15%, and that goes up dramatically as well. And we've heard quite a few folks saying, you know, yikes, this is a bigger part of a payroll deduction than what I was expecting, even as rates have increased. And we budget those on 6 months of actual, so Green Mountain Care Board approved rates for Blue Cross Blue Shield in this case. Because they're on a calendar year, we have to make our best guess. So this budget has a really optimistic increase assumption at just 5% premium increase for the following year. When you look at sort of larger trend lines, the big increases tend to be more muted, lead to more muted ones. I would rather see a bigger number, but that obviously makes the math harder. It's more conservative. We tend to get through this in the last couple of years by our constant levels of transition, so that's how we absorb some of those costs when people change plans and do have changes of circumstance, or you know, people switch from their own spouse's plan and come over to ours. We hire new employees, or whatever it be. So that's still there. All employee increases across every category, with a few exceptions, are at a presumed 3% increase for the next year. Some of the few exceptions might include people whose job classifications have changed, whose experience maybe warrants a different rate. Who, you know, if you remember when we talk about the public works contract, there was one employee that was more senior than the others, but they were all in the same pay grade. So his is up. It worked out to be 4.5%, 5%, but it's really just in that adjustment to a different rate to reflect any kind of seniority. And then there's a question on the check: can we change how we insure town personnel? We could. It means reopening the public works agreement and then trying to. I don't know that we can make that shift based on where we are in the police negotiations, just because it's not part of that. It's one of the ways we actually have been competitive, especially as we learn about some of the concerns in some categories about our retirement options and our pay rates. So it's all kind of balanced out. It's where do you want to spend the money? So we could probably find different health insurance options in the long term. The language allows us to switch providers, but not plan level. I should probably also clarify that. So we could go from a Blue Cross to an MVP, but the savings with the rate increases when we modeled that out weren't significant, because those premiums are a little closer together. Because the premium share doesn't change along with it. That stays at 85-15. But longer term, we could look at different options.
Trevor, I know some private employers have moved from providing health insurance because it's gotten to these crazy levels, and they have employees which are not making huge amounts of money, and so if they are on the Affordable Care Exchange, state exchange, that they get subsidized and they get a lot of this big chunks of these premiums paid for, so that they can actually pay their employees better at the same time that like everybody wins. Like health insurance costs for the organization go down, at the same time employees do better. Is something like that an option for us?
We have a few folks that are in that category. Generally, even though our pay rates leave us on the sort of, if you think of it almost like you think about economic classes, we're lower middle class, teetering sort of with kind of lower class ranges there, even with some of our things. Some folks make too much as part of their households to qualify, that for whom that might be a relief for them and others. And we actually have a couple of folks who do still are still able to take advantage of those types of circumstances. So they get the health insurance buyout. We've upped that through the years, but we only have a handful of folks across departments. In the general fund, there are 2 of us that receive health insurance buyouts. I'm one of them, and I'm blanking on who the other one is, but
I see. So that's an option, that's sort of a built-in option that if people can go out and get it
Yeah.
cheaper themselves, they can take the buyout.
Yeah, so you
But
can
is the
qualify.
buyout big enough, the
Uh,
buyout figure big enough to, like, to make it, because I don't know what it's like, I don't know what the buyout is for the town of Randolph, but I know in like other organizations, the buyouts are not, terribly,
Yeah.
like, usually it's just a small fraction of what the actual cost of the insurance is.
I think it comes in handy when, say, we're bringing in a new employee and they've got access to our benefits, and maybe their spouse or partner has sort of their own employer provider, some other health insurance thing available. If they're roughly equivalent, getting a little extra from us for the buyout is everything that tips it, but you're not gonna, if those things aren't equivalent, we don't pay enough to upset the balance. For a family plan in this budget, it goes up to about $6,000 per year from $4,500. And we follow what we do in the union contracts with those, and it's $3,500 for an individual, just to give you a sense of range. And so that alone doesn't incentivize probably much of anything unless you're in a 50-50 spot with which coverage you take. There are some towns out there that will offer a percentage of the premium value, so it becomes additional income functionally. So I'm trying to remember, it was Woodstock at one point was offering, it was like 50% of that. So yeah, you're paying $21,000 for somebody on a family plan, but in that scenario, we save $21,000 per employee that takes it. And so we're just kind of splitting what that would otherwise be. And so at some point, we could look at those more aggressive models to that, but it's challenging. Some people are way more open to other products. Some people we have, that's a big reason of why they're here and why they stay here, because of what their individual needs be. So we talked a lot about sort of that healthcare unicorn, one that sort of works for everybody, given the fact that they are in very disparate places with what they need. So you'll find that across the different fund budgets. We have way more people on. I think totaled up, it was of the employees on health insurance. I remember the number. It's the majority of them are on either a family plan or one of the more expensive two-person plans. So we're in the $26,000 to $42,000 range for most employees. And then a single plan, we're valuing around $15,000, which is up from, I think when I started, we were budgeting closer to $9,000-10,000 for that. And that's just our 85% shares. The whole value is obviously greater than that. We don't usually spend a lot of time on the revenues when we go through the general fund. I can go through them real quick if you want. The big number that everybody's concerned about every year is the very top line in that revenue, and that's the to be raised by taxes. The way we get at that number is we take the total budget and we subtract the total estimated non-tax revenue, and that's the remainder is what we divide by the grand list. Mimi and usually Dennis do that math for us in August, and that's what we base the rate on. So this is an estimated one. In here we've got grand list growth assumed for all of the budgets using numbers from our recent reappraisal, so there's a little bit in there. I want to sit with Mimi and just make sure they're at 2% right now, but we'll see how comfortable she is with that. And we usually try to hew very conservatively and think about what's out there and what's ahead, and so that'll impact where any tax rate estimates go. I will tell you this, at the reappraised amount, with a 2% increase, the amount of additional capacity we generate without negatively impacting the tax rate it's kind of nice to be in. That would be a good problem to have, because there's a little bit extra without doing anything different with the rates because of that increased value. So that's been nice, at least in this planning part of the exercise.
Trevor, can you say that again using slightly different
Yeah,
words?
as much as people are complaining about how much their taxes went up, we have capacity.
Well, when you think about it, just from where the tax rate got set in August to where the tax rate would be estimated to be set next year. So with that growth in grand list figure from, say, it's April to April really, every penny raises more money with every dollar increase in the grand list. So when you factor in 2% on top of 6.8 million is our grand list value, you get quite a bit pretty quickly from there. You know, a penny that raises $66,000 this year raises $68,000 or $69,000 at that assumption. And then as a single penny, doesn't sound like a lot, but make it 65 pennies. And then suddenly you got a lot with the same rate. So people still saw the big jump because their values went up so much because of the first
Yeah.
time in 16, 18 years that they had changed like that. But from that year to the next year, it'll be something much more marginal.
I think where we struggle with this is we don't get anything from the school side of it that gives us what the impact is on people's tax bills. And so when you look at it from the town perspective, and you're trying to pass a town budget, and you say, well, it's only X on that, right, like 2 pennies or 3 pennies, that's good, but when the whole bill comes in, and it's got that education side to it, that's where people just freak out, and we don't do a good job saying, this is what the town controls, and this is the amount, how your bill is, and this is the part that's the education part, and sorry, but that's really where you're taking the bath. Like, it's hard for us to sit here and be like, oh, we're only raising it 2 pennies, but yet what we hear is, I can't keep paying these property taxes, and I think we've done a great job the last few years of keeping the town portion in check. It's that education portion that's just killing us, but it reflects back on us.
It's about what, 2/3, give or take, it's
So-
65% of your bill is
In
something like
most
that.
towns, the education side is between 70 to 75% of the taxes. So where municipalities suffer is that we share the same piece of paper, right? The tax bill comes from the town. The education portion doesn't come from the state, it comes from the town. The homestead declarations that we have and those prebates, and that doesn't affect the town at all. Yet, we here at the town put so many hours in handling the homestead part that we don't even see, because that's all going to the education side and the education grant list. And that's something that hopefully the legislation is talking about this year. Obviously, I don't think they're ever gonna take the education side off the paper tax bill, right? But it's 2 different taxes on one piece of paper, and the people who have to deal with it
By the town.
is the town. Well, you, but us,
Yeah.
like, because we're the only people that can be talked to. And this is food for thought, and then I'll stop so you can keep going. So
You're
when
good,
we
Nancy.
are doing our tax rate, we have a grand list that we can reconcile, right? We have our budget divided by the grand list minus what you raise in exemptions equals your tax rate. Pretty cut and dry. Boom, boom, boom. When you come to the education grant list, you cannot reconcile the education grant list with, taxes raised the grand list, because all the towns pay into the grand list. And then there's all these exceptions and exemptions, so we can't reconcile. Like, at least this is something I just learned, probably over $10 million a year gets increased to the grand list by reappraisals. Technically speaking, our education tax rate should go down, right? That doesn't happen, because we have all the different weights and ways that they come into the equation of the education tax rate. One thing that helps us in Randolph is that we are considered not a gold star town, like, let's say like Woodstock. So when the per pupil tax rate is established, we benefit by having students that have free lunch and IEPs and whatnot. Our students cost more on average to teach than others, and that's taken into account for our education tax rate. Our CLA being above 100 is going to be helpful for us, as opposed to when our CLA was under 100, because when the state equalizes your tax rate, they're just squeezing a balloon. So yeah, your assessed values are down, but the state will add however much your CLA is to get you at 100%, and then apply your tax rate to it. Now that our CLA is above 100, they take away that much from your assessed value and apply your tax rate. So that's where, even though the taxes hurt this year, if you notice, last year, our education tax rate was like 1.64 for homestead, and this year it was 1.11, something. So our education tax rate went down because our CLA went up and our grand list included. But I will stop there. If you want more knowledge, just make an appointment. I'll call you. We can go at it, like.
Say it again.
I'll say it again.
Pick it up.
I have like displays and charts and stuff, but we could go over that. But yeah, it does suck that, because people think I made the education tax rate. I didn't make the education tax rate. Like, I did the assessed values that haven't been, the grand list has not gradually increased like it should be. We have these jumps because before Dennis and I came in, we weren't even gonna do a reappraisal till what? We got triggered? I'll talk about that when it's my turn. So, there you go, I'm done.
But from the town's perspective, we do that exercise of what is the rate, what's the impact, what are you doing? We don't get that from the school, and then they give the budget and it flies
Yeah.
through. I don't understand
I don't
how
think this-
voters push that through,
I
not
don't
having
think
a clue
The
what
school
it's doing to
can't
them.
control it either, because the school can have a flat budget and the school can have a reduced budget, and your taxes in the education side can still raise because it's not the school, our own school, grand list. Their budget goes into the state and it's distributed,
Yep. No, I
solely,
get all
so-
that. What I'm saying is,
Yeah.
it's not right to ask
No.
voters to go approve a budget that they don't even know the impact of. That's where I have a problem
Yeah.
with it. Like, you're not voting on a budget for the whole entire state education system, but you're taxed accordingly. You're
yeah,
voting on a local budget that you have no idea what it's gonna do to that piece of
Yeah.
paper.
let's talk to our legislation
It's
about it.
awful.
Because really, that's where the change is.
Eyes all focused.
Yeah.
Not Larry specifically,
I know.
but the overall legislature, that's where we're gonna see that change,
It's
if we want that
awful.
change
It
to
is-
happen.
Yep.
I mean, this is gonna be one of the 2 or 3 top topics in the legislature this year, so it's definitely gonna be looked at really carefully and talked about a lot. We'll see what happens.
But it seems to me that the town portion, which is much smaller, is kind of where I was going. And we're fighting, like, do we add another person, right? So do we add these little incremental costs that make it able that we can meet the level of service that the residents demand? And our budget goes up 4% instead of 3%, we're at risk of getting voted down.
Yep.
But then you got an education budget that just flies right through and people get 11% increases or 17% increases or whatever on their tax bill, and it's like, check this out, like, there's no logic to it. I just don't, I struggle with this because it's 70 to
But,
75% of your bill.
Yeah,
but-
in Randolph though, aside from that police budget, recently, I don't think we've had any budgets go down in, I don't even know how long.
Well, we haven't, but we've had threats of it, right? And so we try to be fiscally responsible and do that thing, but if we put everything we needed into a municipal budget, we'd go down. There's no way, I can't imagine it would. If we put every position we needed and upgrades and the capital projects and everything we really would be nice to have, we would go down.
Even with the ambulance and the debt service swing, you're probably going from 0.8 something percent, say is just a percentage increase, back up north of at least 7.5, I would guess, if everything went into the general fund. To fix every problem, to put every transfer right where it would be right away, that's probably what you're talking about. Because when we were still having the ambulance money and that debt service payment was in there, we were sort of flirting with that 5.5% line was what that first one looked like. And you can see some of the increases are absorbed in those moves. And so just sort of to point out, because it had come up as a question as well in other places, is that The reason that to be raised number is lower is because we took $415,000 that would be raised straight property taxes and put it as a separate question. So that's the bulk of that amount, why there's a difference. And then everything that increases minus that debt service payment is sort of the remainder of that number. And so that's why it looks like it's $473,000 less, it's because those things are appearing other places or have been taken off the books entirely. Looking at the rest of the revenue real quickly, because there's not a lot different in there. There aren't many changes. We've tried to be a little more conservative in certain categories. When you look at, there's an orange section when you get down into the transfers in. I was just still showing that for a couple of year period. This was something we did last year. This was an auditor's recommendation. If you remember, for a while we were paying for what was basically highway fund debt. We were raising money in the highway fund, transferring it out of the highway fund, transferring it into the general fund, and then paying the debt service out of the general fund. So we were touching that one payment 3 times. And basically what the auditor's recommendation was is touch it once. So that will appear, that debt service payment that's not there in orange, but you see in the 24 budget. When we get to the highway fund budget, that's where you'll see that, because we're still making payments on those trucks. So just as you see some of those, there's a couple of spots where there are different colored lines. I'll try to call them out. They're just to make sure that they're really clear, folks. The ambulance didn't go away. We haven't disappeared it. It's on the bottom of the detail sheet. It's now the very last section on the summary sheet as well. So it's in there. It's shown. You can see the 3 years just like everything else, so that we don't lose it anywhere in there. And so I don't know if you want to go through anything on the revenue end, or maybe as we go through sort of the expenses. I'm trying to be mindful of everybody we have and all of the questions. Because otherwise we're into sort of our first general fund category. Those are what we call the executive expenses. This is really a catch-all category. It's we sort of internally, the manager's budget is essentially what this is referred to. This is where we pay for all of the health insurance for general fund employees, where you see a lot of the retirement costs. You'll see unemployment insurance, the new child care tax contribution, which the town is picking up the entire 0.0011% or whatever it worked out to be. And then there's a section in each of the other budgets for that. And so the first section are executive expenses. These are all wages, benefits, withholdings, all of those things. Some of these things we just set some money aside for. We are going to update the numbers for workers' comp and all of the different insurances. We've just got to pull those from our VLCT anticipated billing, but these we think are going to be pretty close to that number. There are no big changes, as I mentioned. There are 3% for everybody. Where you see 51% on the finance staff, we adore Kayla, but we're not giving her a 50% increase, though she's certainly worth it. We have been talking about how to get excess capacity in finance and some administrative capacity in highway. So what we're looking at in this budget, and when you see in the highway fund, is a reconfiguration of one of those positions where we split it 50-50. So that person will work in finance 50% of the time and would be sort of the highway admin 50% of the time. So that's 50% of that value, and then half of those insurance costs, half of those social security withholding, all of those things are in this section of the general fund, and you'll see them again, the other half in the highway fund when we get there. And so once we do that, we'll have 2.5 people in that department. 5 years ago, we had 3 people in that department, and so it's a nod to sort of get us back to, that's been an area of pressure. That person will help with grant reimbursements, working with Jeff primarily on that, and any other staffer. Can use them in any sort of number of ways, processing accounts payable. We've talked about sort of cross-training, building in some resiliencies. They can also handle some of the highway stuff that we need to, from notices to sand permits to all of those other little tasks that kind of come in addition to being someone you can call. Because our crew is out in the field, somebody calls the shop, doesn't get anybody, they don't get a call back within an hour and a half. And Judy's dealing with the mailbox that got hit, and so we can use Judy to do other things that
Just needs a
are more
smell
valuable,
button.
certainly to me. Not that that isn't. I don't want the mailbox call, but and so that's why that one's up so much, and that's why you see when you Social Security, that's up as much as it is. Some of the thing that's good with the retirement, we hope that it holds, is that We had been budgeting about 21% as our employer contribution to the state employees' retirement. This is closer to 17% based on where our rates have actually been. We had some heads up that they may change, and so that number may or may not by the time we set the budget, but we haven't heard about it yet. It'll be one of those mid-year changes that we're trying to figure out how to adjust to on the fly. So it looks like we've saved some money on retirement. It's really just budgeting at 21%, having our actual employer contribution be at 17%. And why we're so high is with the VSER's years of underfunding, trying to get those pensions back into healthy states. We were one of the first groups to see that employer contribution go up. The category that we fall in with other state college, state university employees, and a few other buckets. We've spent a lot of time talking about retirement through the lens of policing, but we've looked at everything from moving everything over into the municipal employees retirement system into different groups. And unfortunately, we can't do that. But if we're in VEMR's and sort of the standard group right now, our contribution would be somewhere around 8%. So you can figure that's half of our retirement bill that we're paying. That, pick another like-sized town, because we're one of 3 in VSER's. It's us, Bethel, and we found out Danville's in VSER's as well. So Heinsberg, at about the same population, is paying 8% less for roughly the same number of people. But it is what it is. We've explored it. There's legislative action required to make any move, and it gets pretty complicated pretty fast.
We may be knocking on your door.
Yeah. So just sort of moving down, we're expecting a decrease. Orange County has maybe not been the most robust service provider anyway. They do even less now than they ever did before. And our grand list, they used to base it on the equalized education grand list, so being in the spot we're in should also help. This is last year's actual number, or the current fiscal year. This one might even go down a little bit. I looked the other day to see if we had, we get that number a little bit later, and is always very useful. The taxes we pay to the town of Bethel for the old Boy Scout camp, I believe it is. So just so you see that one. I won't go through all of these line by line. That's a weird enough
Are we
one.
gonna sell it?
They're going through a reappraisal. I don't know if you guys know that. They're going through a reappraisal this year, so their values are gonna change.
So, yeah, can we sell that? Can
So
we
now that
list
we're practiced on the other end of the grievance, should we grieve it just for
Well,
fun?
I can't grieve it, but if you guys wanna grieve it, I could help you out in any format that you need. It's a possibility and should be thought of.
I think we wanna sell it.
Yeah,
We talked about bringing a realtor on to get rid of it.
yeah.
We've tried for years to find somebody that meets the criteria, and the deed is pretty clear. If we can't, then we can sell it.
I think there's a demonstrated record of trying to work within the parameters, yeah. The technology number's up, it's to reflect actuals, some replacement needs. We are moving to cloud-based services, doing a few other things that have been recommended by our technology services provider, adding a couple more licenses so that more people can work sort of in more places with access to everything. That NEMRIC finance assistant was one we kept in when we got fully staffed in finance. We thought we'll keep it just for sort of consulting and training and other. You will see the actual in that line for this year go up again as we navigate yet another transition in there. So that's where we pay for Cynthia, who usually comes to help us out. I'm trying to think what else is in here that's radically different. The audit's up a little bit with all of the federal pass-through grants and other funds coming our way. North Wells as an EPA grant, we're going to be over the threshold, so that's our regular audit plus an anticipated share of a single audit for those. No change in the general fund payment for service. That'll keep Scott and C4 for about the energy grant, not the explosive-ish, but yeah. That'll be good for about 6 weeks. No other big changes there. The select board sections next, you guys spend a lot of money. A robust $13,000 and change. No real changes there. The town report number we keep sort of inching down as every year we print copies, and every year we end up with a better sense of how many are left over based on the number we order. And we still have a robust collection of last year's reports. So we've kept the same number. The prices go down a little bit because we've shrunk the size of it a little bit as the school does different things to provide its report. And so at some point, we'll see, we might even be, this might be one of those things where we print 200 copies and we get a PDF and we have the ability to print anybody who doesn't want it electronically, one on the spot. So we'll continue to figure that one out the best we can. Into the fire budgets, no real changes in that first section. That's mostly where we pay for dispatch and a few other smaller things. Each fire department is broken out separately here. You can see the village fire station looks like they have a really big increase, especially compared to the others. That's in line 231 for personal safety equipment. I believe that's air packs that they need to replace based on the schedule. So it's a $5,000 increase, but it looks like a bigger percentage than that.
But Randolph Center's drops.
Yeah,
Isn't
and that's
it a
based
matter
on,
of where their, actually, their personal safety equipment drops, but their air packs increases?
yep. And they all do try to buy them together. So we may make sure that East Randolph also is where they want to be. They got 10.5 in there from before, but they try to bulk purchase to get the best rate they can on all of those. There are no real changes. We'll get to a little bit later in the transfers out, but the fire equipment transfer to capital is the same number as it has been. There's about $220,000 in there right now. Yeah, another 110, and what you have is 3/5 of the price to buy a truck, which is, we have 9 trucks, and I'm trying to remember, 5 or 6 of them are now outside that.
Actually fire trucks.
Yeah. They're outside of that useful service range, so we're keeping an eye on some proposed changes to OSHA and a few other things. We're 20 years is the life of service, and most of our fleet falls in that older category. But we gotta have a larger conversation on how many trucks and where do they go and all of that. So I just sort of point those out because they're related. Into recreation expense, nothing super different in there. We do have all of the camp costs, and I should have mentioned that on the revenue end. Revenue's in at sort of historic numbers, you know, when I say that's like a 5-6 fiscal year look that we had. And some of the expenses based on similar modeling, so they could always be sharpened up to reflect reality. We have left that marker in there, so that we can continue to figure out what it looks like. That gives us the ability to do everything from enter into partnerships to look at sort of amended camp schedules, whether it be shortened or we fill weeks with others. And if you have more questions on that, we talk about some of the things that have come up as ideas. Into the operating expenses part of the budget, not a lot different there, just sort of tuning up different costs. I mean, pool chemicals have gone up quite a bit in recent years.
I can
they made a
speak
jump.
about it. It was just the timing of from kind of last year learning the pool operations, and then falling into this year, one of the orders fell into the fiscal year that reflects it differently. So it's just kind of getting on that ordering pattern properly so it reflects effectively in the budget calendar year.
Are we gonna go into these more detail? Right?
We
Is
can. I
this
was
just an
gonna-
overview?
I was gonna do the overview and then see if you wanted to go back into the individual departments, if that makes sense for everybody. Just trying to,
Yep.
there's a lot in here, and I thought maybe if we went, I'm using the model I learned when we went to San Diego Zoo, and I'm not trying to be a wiseacre, but they recommended that you take the bus tour first because it's such a big place with so much to see that way you get to figure out where you wanna go back.
And I can speak more specifically when we get there to the operative expenses that kind of live between the buildings and grounds and recreation department budgets.
Let's go through the big part first.
That's what I'm saying, when you're done with that, I have some to add.
Keep going, Trevor.
So going into buildings and grounds, you'll see there's a couple of new lines there. You'll see these repeated in highway and some other places. These are longevity and merit bonuses. There isn't anybody who qualifies for the longevity bonus. So when we did the public works, I'm just calling it that. I know that's not how we describe it. It's the easiest way to get a bunch of departments together that have multiple words in their name. Those are some of the ways we got through some of those conversations about how we reward people that are really going above and beyond, and how we reward people that have stuck with us. And that was how we did that rather than bake it into base rates. So you'll see those show up there. Nothing, again, that's really different. The seasonal help is just sort of increasing that to reflect some of the rates we're paying. The folks that generally will help us out from spring till somewhere around mid to late October. And one employee primarily that comes back year over year at this point. to do various, mostly grounds maintenance tasks. I don't think he's ever done any facility stuff. In the operating expenses, small changes throughout. Nothing too major. The mowing contract increase reflects the bid as you awarded it, so that's a 2-year bid. This summer fiscal year will be the first of that with a new provider. Into planning and zoning, there's not too much. There's some of the big increases when you look at the salary and other lines is we had budgeted for this fiscal year. We had sort of stepped it up with a half into a full, so and reflects where we hired. So this is sort of part of the evolution of bringing that position on as a separate entity. We don't link this section specifically to that, but we've kept the anticipated grant administration revenue number from last year at the same amount. It's $20,000. We thought that was pretty conservative. We haven't fully gotten to road test this program yet, but that's 4 grants at the maximum admin at $5,000 is what they tend to be. Every grant's a little different, but that's where they often end up. So it seems like a reasonable number based on the number of grants, and we can do that for grants that are ours, and also glean that from any grant that's a pass-through. We've tried to, Mark, for example, has been tracking the time he spends on the NEP pass-through, and so we will at least be compensated for what has become a significant time inconvenience. Into town clerk treasurer, we have a new town clerk treasurer. As you may notice, she's done a few things to the building to try to make it more welcoming and inviting.
On the cheap.
None of those are reflected in the budget, this has all been
I do it all
budget friendly.
myself.
I voted, it looks great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Not really too many changes there. The weird quirky thing with the salary is this is more about capturing the time element than it is about sort of year-over-year increases. So she will get the same increase as everybody else. It's just the rate she started at and the rate Emery ended at. So that's why that looks like it's not an increase. There is an increase in there. It just doesn't look great at 0. Don't be mad at me, be mad at math.
It's a $6
Math
increase.
swap.
I know.
And I get $6 for the whole year.
More than I got.
Woo!
Select board member, I'm just saying.
Select board hasn't had a raise
I
in
need
the
to add
whole
another
time
line,
I've
a
been
couple
on it.
of lines.
And we don't get anything for the police stuff, and that takes most of our time, so figure that one out. We do that on the cheap.
You can have a
He's
seat
got
for
a
apparently.
he's got a gift for you.
I know. Oh, it's not handcuffs at least.
Julie, what needs to be done?
We did it for the money, we did it for the wrong reason.
Right?
So we've got small increases in both the insurance and the heating oil for Chandler. And I was just looking at, we had a 5-6 fiscal year trend line and just trying to do the best to kind of guess on those as to where we might actually land. In the debt service piece, again, you'll see 2 multicolored boxes there. The one in green is the fire station payment that's been removed. The orange ones are where we were paying for those. I mentioned sort of the earlier orange box. That was where the money went back out of the general fund in that prior model of highway fund to general fund and out. You can see we've got different categories for TAN, so tax anticipation note, letter of credit. You see it on both the revenue and expenditure. We haven't had to do one for a couple of years, so we've gotten the permission from you to do it. Those are when we borrow money in anticipation of the taxes to sort of pay the bills in the first 3 months. But we've been able to make it without doing that, which is kind of nice. We didn't even ask this last year for permission. I'm not sure. And we'll see when we get around again. Some of it might depend on the pace of FEMA reimbursements for 2023, frankly. And then down into the reserve funding, there's only one increase in there. It's $10,000. It's for the reappraisal reserve. We already have a timeline that we're on for that. We have a rough order of magnitude for expected cost. This helps make sure that the money's there in 6 years when we have to do this again.
5.
5?
For
5.
statistical, we'll talk about it later.
Yeah. So that's why that one's up, is because we know that that's coming. Everybody else is held level. Like I'd mentioned, the fire equipment reserve is at $110,000. So as we think about saving for another truck, that's certainly not gonna get us there as quickly, but could cover a bunch of other equipment.
Trevor?
Yeah.
Here's a question I feel like I should know the answer to, but our reserve accounts,
Mhm.
are those just like checking accounts with, or do we get any kind of return on, we get any interest on any of those accounts?
Only in sort of a master account scenario, it's more sort of fund accounting in that there's a reserve line for, facilities reserve has a line and it shows transfer in and balance and any expenditures come out of an expenditure line in that. It's all still in the,
But like some financial
Master
institution
account.
is holding this money for us, right?
most of it's in Bar Harbor, Mascoma.
It usually just sits in an account area in
Yeah.
there. It's like an accounting, it's an accounting piece, not an actual cash piece.
But there is thoughts.
It's investment thoughts. But yes, so it's not in its own bank account as a reserve account, but it is accounted for separately in our fund accounting system.
Right, no, that's fine, I'm just, but no matter exactly how it's held by some financial institution, right?
Mhm.
Like, we don't just have it under a mattress someplace.
He wants to make sure that the money is working for us and we're not working for it.
It is not under our mattress either, or chair, or in a drawer.
So, but it generates no return,
I think on our accounts, we get a small.
0.01% type.
You can see that there's general fund interest income in the revenue section. It's a little bit bigger than it has been in past years, but that's because we've had ARPA funds in there for a while. It's because we've had the legal settlement funds for the fire. So we had some bigger things in there separate from what we would normally have. So we've raised a little more money that way, but not in any way we want to budget or build
Just-
around.
It just seems like, we should be able to get a few percent on our money that's just sitting in an account someplace.
I think if we were able to build out a more robust and realistic multi-year capital plan, pair it with like a long-term financial plan, you could, those outer year dollar amounts, to the extent that you have them, you might be able to do something. Usually when we invest, it's in something that we can return to liquid as soon as we need it to.
Right, but like,
So we're talking CDs and other smaller.
yeah, but even ordinary people now have access to, savings accounts, checking accounts that, get 2, 3, 4% interest. I don't have it through my accounts at Bar Harbor or Northfield, but I also don't have, hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting in those accounts, so.
I think we could look at that. I'd want us to build out the first part in a way that was really reliable and sustainable. I don't know that we've had going back years, decades even, a capital plan that you could sort of bank on.
Right, but I'm just thinking,
Oh,
these
that was some
would still be,
uncertainty.
these would be perfectly liquid accounts, like you'd still be able to just take money out of it whenever you needed, there'd be no penalty. It would just be, we'd have some extra, you know what I'm saying, Tammy?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. No, we've had some conversations. She's got a-
Yeah, I was gonna say, we've begun the.
You've begun thinking along these
yeah,
lines.
So,
Okay,
I am the
Yeah.
reticent traditionalist that needs to be broken down in this model, so.
very well.
Can't be
I own
and
that
I'm
feeling.
being very, very patient.
Okay, enough said.
Yeah. So that is the overview of everything that's in here. I'm looking back quick to see if there's anything I wanted to call out that I didn't before, but. So do you have specific sections you want to return to? You want to
Yeah.
just lob questions generally as you
I have a
think of them?
I have a specific question. Back on 167.
Mm-hmm.
Way back. General fund payment for police services.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I remember correctly, this number is the expected / what we've been traditionally seeing our police district, our force go outside the district for to respond to things. That's where this number comes from. I didn't say that very well, but
Yeah.
I think that's right.
That's long been the intent. This number comes from what was funded in last year's budget, with that sort of being the anticipated amount for an all-in cost for the calls outside of the district.
Right. So one of the things which I think we talked about last year and then we didn't actually do, but maybe we could do this year, is the problem with that being a number that's just like, oh, that's what we spend on policing outside the district, is that the police district residents pay a third of that number. And so it doesn't, we're trying to, get people outside the district to pay for services that they're getting, but then they're paying for most of it, but there's a big chunk of it that is still is being paid for by in-district residents and property owners. So I guess what I'm saying is that number should be bigger to account for that, to hold the in-district folks harmless, so they're not paying for outside district services in addition to the in-district services.
So who pays for the services in Brookfield and Braintree and Royalton and outside of Randolph? I mean, that's in that 125 number, so are we gonna break that out even again?
Is that in that 125? Because I thought that 125 was Randolph calls for,
Outside the district.
okay, I thought it was outside the district, but in the town of Randolph.
Here's what I think needs to happen, and you can keep this in the back of your mind as you're up there. All those calls that happen outside of the district are the state police's responsibility.
Mhm.
But the state police says, we only have 50% of our positions filled, but we don't have any money to help these towns that are helping us out. So they're sitting on 50% of their personnel budget. The town of Randolph is paying to cover their service area and calls that they actually call and say, hey, we can't get there, can you do this? That are outside of Randolph even, but they don't wanna help fund any of that. If the state police can't staff and meet their service, that's their responsibility, they should be providing funding to these
So,
local
yeah,
municipal
no, I hear you.
entities to
So,
pay for that
so
line
Trini,
item.
is it your understanding now that what's happening right now is they're budgeted for a certain amount of staff?
Mhm.
They're only hiring or able to hire a certain
Yeah.
fraction of that?
They told us that.
And then they have basically vacancy savings
Yep,
that go back to the general fund?
no, they
essentially?
buy equipment,
They're able to do other things with it?
Look at their year-end, watch their year-end process of what they're spending their money on, that their budget is,
Okay.
and see what that is. But
Okay.
if they're gonna continue that, and they're gonna continue to reach out to these municipalities that have services and say, I can't get to that call, you get to it, they ought to pay for that service.
Yeah, yeah.
If our
I-
sheriff's departments have to contract with Stratford down out of Windsor County and some of those, and those towns have to pay that sheriff's office for service, or Waterbury had to pay the state police for the service level they wanted, right? They contracted with Waterbury for quite a while to provide service.
Yeah, I think they still
Then
do.
it should go the other way too. Right,
Yeah.
like, I think that's where our revenue challenge in the police
Yeah,
district comes
yeah,
from,
no,
is the
I'm
state
writing myself,
police.
I'm gonna find out who I need to talk to, who, like,
You know,
where this
They're,
comes,
we
where
asked
this
them to
comes
come to
out.
the table and meet with us, and they pretty much said, your problem,
Right,
you
okay.
know? But I think that's part of this issue, if they want us to be part of their service plan, they shouldn't be able to just call and say, do it, they should put their money where their mouth is and fund us. And we could easily figure out what that is, cause every call outside of the district is their responsibility.
Sorry, trying to manage Zoom access.
We could track that. Like on a time report, and I'm gonna say this, Scott, so tell me if I'm wrong, but on an employee's time report, they should be able to say whether their time was in or out of the district. And we should be able to code that, capture it, and have some idea. Like you're responding to an incident that starts at the high school, but it takes you out to Braintree or Brookfield, or some of these calls are out there and they ask you to respond to them.
I was just responding to a message, all the end of the year stuff that we, provide, everything is actually broken down, even the timeframes to say we responded to Braintree, say we responded to Brookfield, or all the above, all that stuff is coded out. What you're just asking is, yes, we can do it. It takes a little bit more on the admin level, but yes, we can. I will use an example this week. 2 officers responded to the major crash on 66. That's outside the village. They were there for 3.5+ hours. That's
State
2
polices.
officers being outside the village, and we were the first on scene providing life care before VSP even got there. Their drone that they flew to take measurements instead of being on the road cost more than my budget. It's just what it is.
I offered you a hook today and you said no.
I did not say no.
That's true. I take that back. I offered him a hook.
But they also will call you and say, can you take that call? Or
Yes.
radio or do whatever. They'll reach out and say, we
Yes.
got a call at this location, can you get to it?
We handled a overdose at McDonald's this morning. That VSP requested us to go out because they weren't coming.
See, those they should pay for.
Ooh,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
feel
So do you-
secure.
And so one of the responses I got was, well then, should we charge the town when we come out and there's a major incident, like a murder or whatever? And my take on that is no.
No, that's why we have state
You
police.
want that specialized focus, the state pays for it, so it's available statewide when there's an incident, and they need that type of SWAT or,
Right, we
for
pay
major
them to be
investigations,
backup
whatever.
for our local services. It shouldn't do it, it's not the other way around.
Because we already pay it through our taxes.
and that's they wanna be that, I think their ego would keep them from not responding, but our job at the local level, if they're gonna restrict our ways to raise money, is to provide the community policing level needed, not the major crime stuff. But it's to do it for our folks, not for them to use to meet their needs.
So do you have a sense of whether the solution to this is a legislative solution, like a change in statute, or is it more a change in policy in some agency?
I don't know. I haven't really looked into it enough. I think they could fix it themselves without legislation by contracting with these communities, if they're gonna use them to provide their service. I also think that, I don't know, maybe it's a line item in their budget that has to go, where it's figured out how much of the service they're supposed to be providing is provided by these communities that have police departments. And then a dollar amount in there that is allocated out to them. I don't know what the answer is, but I know that that's where our funding issue is. That's the demand that we're not able to, that we're meeting at the expense of our police district, is
Yeah.
the shortfall of the state police.
All right, I'll do some poking around and see if I can get some answers to how we might fix this.
So it does seem like there's money there. I mean,
Yeah.
sort of hit on it is if you say you got 50 officers slots to fill, but you're only doing 5 a year, and that's not expected to change, then officers 45 through 50 are financial capacity that we could then deploy.
Well, they told
To
us
fill
that
those
day they
gaps.
were only at 54%.
Yeah.
I think they said that their staffing was only at 54%. That tells me 46% of their personnel budget is sitting there idle. And yet we're backfilling
Yeah.
on the backs of our police
Yeah.
department.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Pay up, boys.
Cash on the barrel, head appreciated. Joe's had his hand up for a while. I'm gonna go ahead and guess it's on this topic, but maybe it's something else, but.
It is, I'm just gonna take it topic by topic as you move along. So my real question is, and I hope you can hear me, I'm not sure, but, my real question is that Scott and company go to the schools and then they disperse from the school to Braintree Field, wherever they're going to investigate whatever the problem may be. We got a school board, at least at this point from my understanding, that decides they don't want to put their own resource officer or pay for a resource officer. Yet you're asking our police department, our village police department, if you will, to leave the district and go and investigate that problem that's out in the field, whatever. And so, has anybody thought of asking on the revenue side of saying, hey, this is where accountability needs to come in. We've spent this many hours out of the district, out of our town. And should the school, who enjoys every year greater than $1 million over the last 5 years in surpluses every year, that they tuck it in these little funds everywhere, yet refuse to pay for that small piece of it. And I think it's important that, as you know, and I look at it from my membership on the budget committee, you know, I think it's important that the town reach out to the school and say, look, you know, this is the amount of hours we spend on dealing with this. You have $1 million every year in excess. And you should pay for this, which would be at least in part paid for by those from other towns that you're servicing. That in fact is one suggestion that I have, because I just don't support this, and I don't support the 125,000. If you remember Trini and Trevor, I'm sorry, if you remember on the police budget committee, you came to us with a budget that it was $100,000 for outside of it, you know, for special policing. Miraculously, weeks later after that, it showed up on the budget for $125,000. And I asked the question, could I speak with the auditors, and got no return, because I'm trying to understand where is the accounting for $125,000. Now Larry would like to raise that rate from what I just heard him say, but where is the accounting for that $125,000? Of the time spent out of the district, is that $125,000 actually accounted for in this much time was spent out of the village? And I'm not seeing that. So, are we going to have any type of accounting that actually aligns with that $125,000? That's all I'm gonna say. Thank you.
Thanks. Next. So Joe, I think you heard that they track the calls that are outside, and that's in that report that's published. It's online. Is it on the police website too? And that'll show you. What we're trying to do is get that funding paid for by the state police, because it's services they should be providing but aren't. And I think what you're asking is, are we tracking the actual man hours or labor hours for each of those calls? And the answer is we're not at this point, but we're talking about how do we capture that so that we have a value to give to the state police.
It's not just a value to the state police, it's a value to the voters of the general fund.
Understood, but I would like to see that.
And you know what, and it could be more money, Trini.
But I'd like to see, Joe, that actual dollar value, that line item paid for by the state police instead of any of the Randolph voters.
You know, I don't disagree with you. Matter of fact, I brought that up, and at one of the police committee meetings, Chief said he would not send a bill to the state police. That's what he said. I may misunderstood it, but I'm not thinking so. So
yeah, we can't just randomly send them a bill.
No,
that's
but
what the challenge is.
Phone calls can be made and agreements can be had, or not. But that certainly can be looked into. but I look at it and it just, and say, well, how are we accounting for this? And like I said, it could be much less money, or it could be more money. But at least you'd have an accounting of what happens there. And we're not doing that. So in order to justify the state police, you just need the same number.
I think we're saying the same thing. Right. Do we have other line items?
I don't think I have any questions at this point.
Oops, a screen locked. Okay, did you wanna go through the others, or are those on a different night? Keep going, or are we just general fund tonight?
Yeah, tonight we were thinking just general fund. We pulled buildings and grounds aside, but I went through it in the overview, so we even kinda hit the one that had been separate.
Okay,
The general fund is obviously, it's our biggest set of expenditures, it's our broadest category, it's where we pay for, I don't wanna say most things, cause the highway budget's a good size too, but we
Yeah.
pay for a lot from that and do a lot from that. If there's anything different that I'm missing. It's a
so
fair-
no other questions at this time
Actually,
on the general fund?
I have one quick one. This might be a question for another day, but the WERVA, since we pulled that out for this voting cycle, what happens if the voters turn that down? Do we have a contract with them, or would we just cancel
We
it?
don't have a contract.
Gotcha, so
For
that-
members,
The members got you, so we just
We
cancel our
just would-
membership?
well, it would be interesting.
Yeah.
And I think the question that ought to be out there is like, if they turn it down in March, we're probably gonna be looking at where do we contract.
Right.
But I do think we ought to have that conversation with some of the other providers ahead of time, so we can put the full picture out there of,
What,
you know,
what the other
here's
possibilities
where
are.
we are currently, here's where the costs have gone. You know, up 115,000 in 3 years is a lot. And, you know, we've had these conversations, whether it's with, maybe it's Berrytown, maybe it's, is it First Branch?
Yeah, that would be
Chelsea,
one.
like, talk to a few of them of kind of what would that look like? You know, is that an option? And if it's an option, kind of, you know, how would that work? What would it cost? What's the service look like? And, you know, we probably ought to have some options in case it goes down.
Mhm.
You know, what would the pricing be? What would the service level be? Would they put an ambulance in the village fire station? There's room, like, I don't know what the answer is. I know there's others starting, cause Brookfield is covered partially by Berrytown.
Yeah.
So, and it's good to look at your options once in a while, even if it stays where it is. So I think the answer is there is no plan at this point, but we probably ought to have one. All right, at this point then, we'll move on to the manager's report.
Well, just one quick note, special appropriations, it's in at last year's number, the petition deadline hasn't passed. We've heard there might be some extras, but,
Yeah.
so just so you're aware, that one could change.
I have some further questions on what, is the recreation fund in the general fund?
Yes, it is.
Yep.
It is, and it's not about expenditures so much, it's about revenues. And the question I have is that, in looking at it, and I'm sorry I don't have two screens, but I can bring it up and have this one on the side. So the question I have is I don't see user fees raising anywhere. Yet inflation over the past years has been upwards to 15%, but in the last 12 months, inflation is 2.75%. And so as we see in revenues raised by taxes, obviously that increased quite a bit, but we don't see user fees going up. Even if it's for the minimal of 2.75%, we don't see that. And I'm not sure if the library fund is in the same place. The library fund has 10% increase in their expenditures. However, we don't see anything going up in user fees for folks that are using this service. And granted, I totally understand that a vast majority of it is paid for by the taxpayers, and on taxes. However, I think it's important to keep in mind as we're looking at these type of increases, insurance increases cost a lot, and I totally agree with the town manager that these are what it's gonna cost us to insure folks. However, does it always have to fall on the backs of the taxpayers, and can some of it, or at least a small part of it, fall on the user fees?
Okay, well, we can have Trevor look at those and see where those fall
We can,
and what can be
Morgan,
done.
Morgan's done some multi-year looked at sort of what percentages we've had, so we can pull that for if you wanna see it in detail, or if you have any questions tonight. So there's been some work on that's already in
But
there.
if you look at your proposed budget, Trevor, every line item on user fees is 0% increases.
Now, some of them are
And
decreased,
yet, on the
Joe.
other,
Just
so
something with that.
I think it's important to balance that sum.
Yeah, it's about 30% just based in terms of what the non-tax revenue is versus the proposed expenditure for fiscal '26. And you were saying 30
Do you
was
want me to-
30 was historic, 50 was a possible someday target.
Do you want me to explain that? It's 10 years that I've looked over, close to 15 years of recreation budget. Joe, Morgan here, rec department. I've been looking at the rec department budget very closely the last year and a half in its operative aspects, but then looking at it generally over the last 10 to 15 years, and it has, from the actual budgets, has generally been driven by 30 to 50% revenue. And just in analyzing that and understanding where we can decrease some costs by capitalizing on a lot of partnerships we have existing for some of our programming, and then also looking a little more critically at, yes, exactly what you're saying, how we could increase those membership fees to fully cover it, but 30 to 50% is the average general range that 10 to 15 years rec budget has existed as, so we're trying to look at ways that we can get closer to that 50% on a regular basis. And right now, we're in a lot of transitional periods within the rec department, so we haven't made any big moves immediately, but hopefully in the near 3 to 5 years, we can start to really get the rec budget in a way that it is less of a burden on the taxpayer, if that makes sense.
It certainly does make sense. However, I look at it and say, okay, so our user fees haven't gone up. Matter of fact, one of the things I don't see in the proposed budget is actually the 24 actuals. You know, you see 24, but we don't see what the real actuals are, at least on my screen, if you will. So you'd understand where those actuals fell. You know, in user fees on the recreation side of it, I more look at it as that not only Randolph residents, again, use our Randolph recreation, and you do a great job, and our recreation is phenomenal for a town of our size. You know, I was excited to actually see the police department is going to be doing some kind of, we're gonna pay for your skates and have that going on. Thank you, Scott. I think it's a great community thing to do. However, I look at user fees and say, okay, so instead of $2 to rent skates, and you know, with what it costs us for health insurance and all these other pieces, should we be charging $2.25? You know what I mean? Because you don't see those numbers moving up in user fees, yet we see our taxes paid for by taxes going up at very large rates, 10% rates, 8% rates. Library, same way. The library doesn't really increase any of their user fees, yet they have a 10% increase in their budget, which means the burden falls on the taxpayer and not the user. You know, so that's when I look at it and say, how do we make sure that it isn't just solely footed by the folks that may not use those services? You know, so that's my thought on it. Thank you though. Thank you for bringing it forward.
I just did looking quick when he mentioned it, I looked down, the library detail sheet needs a change, it only carried one of the two numbers over, so they're not down 12%, they're up 10. That's just from the detail
Right.
sheet. You can see from the detail
Correct, so
sheet, yeah.
We're up 10%, but we don't
My
raise
apologies
it
on
for someone to use it, you know, so just
But we're not on that one
a
tonight,
thought
right?
of
Yeah.
how you somewhere come in, I'm not even saying this is balanced, I'm just saying that it may help a little bit to look at those areas.
All right, so Joe, Trevor and Morgan will look at that and see if there's any adjustment to be made going into this next year, or whether that needs to be held off for another fiscal year. We'll see that come out in the next version. Was there?
Great, thank you so much,
Yep.
thank you so much for your time, thank you.
Yep. Manager's report.
And everything beyond what's written, there is skating with the cops tomorrow at 4.
Can we increase the rent on the skates ahead of Friday?
Whoa.
You got all the fingerprinting money, I mean, you're good to go.
We're gonna call
The
the
free hot
insurer
cocoa,
tomorrow with
too.
double
Good call,
coverage.
good call.
See my budget, man, whoa.
And Scott, know that I am glad to make a personal donation that will help you out.
As long as there's video of this whole event.
Yeah, are you skating, Joe?
You know, I used to be a hockey player. Actually, I played 1 year of junior A's and I went in the Marines after that because it was safer. And I still have a pair of CCM Super Tacs hanging in my barn.
Right on.
However, you know, and I used to
But the
coach hockey
laces
for
may
a
not be
period
good.
of time. I couldn't get the parents anymore.
Joe, if you'd like to
So-
donate and they're within the range of 10 to 12 men's size, we'd
I'm
love them.
looking down there and donate $100 to it, absolutely.
Well, we need more
I'll just
skates
send
that are men's big sizes.
They'd like your skates, Joe.
Yeah, donate your skates, Joe.
Keep your money.
I'm gonna hang on to them until I turn 67, I'm sorry.
Might use them.
Anyways, you folks have a great
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
So, next up, we have to find that we need to go into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
I
Aye. Opposed?